English translation 922nd contact Wednesday, the 3rd of December 2025, 8:17 hours.
Ah, hello. Here you all are. Welcome. Two of you can sit here on the sofa. Yes, and here is another chair.
Well, I will take this one, because that way I can be helpful to you when you are writing, because I think the two of us can take down some of what is being said. But greetings, Edward.
Greetings too, and I will sit on the sofa with Florena.
I will join Enjana there. Greetings, dear friend.
I am pleased to welcome you all three here together once again, because usually you only come here individually.
There are now officially 4 of us, with Quetzal responsible for contact with you, as I have already explained to you, so we want to come here together today, because we also have a great deal to discuss with you, but this is only for your ears, and will not only take up many hours, but also your absence from here. Today and tomorrow we will need a lot of time, and besides, you will not have to record all of our conversations, but only those that do not concern what.
Yes, what you have already said, that is fine with me too.
And we are delighted that we can be with you for longer periods of time.
Yes, me too. Plus then our range of conversations is also much wider, even when you come here individually and we can talk about this and that. It is just a good thing that it is not always conversations that need to be recorded, because otherwise there would not be any time left to devote to the other work. All the things I write for you every day, as well as writing out the time signs 3 or 4 times a day, take up a lot of time.
Yes, because we would also be busy just coming to you to dictate to you. For which, by the way, Arlian and his crew are endeavoring to work out a way that a help in this regard can be replaced by androids, because we are hampered in our tasks by our dictation work. But now, dear friend, we want to tackle other things first, for which we will have to go away together several times, which will be the case several times in the next 5 or 6 days, so you will be absent from the center. And that is how it will be right now for the first time, because...
Well, that is not a problem. When I am away and cannot be reached.
You are always so spontaneous without.
Yes I am. I just think a bit faster than is generally the case, because I am just a quick thinker, as Svoth said each time.
He also noted that in his annals, that now we have.
Here we are. We were gone for a full 3 hours.
We will go back now, and come back at 3:00 p.m.
Okay, go ahead then. For my part I have to get across anyway, because as I can see here on the monitor, the post bus is pulling up. So, goodbye. See you later.
Here we are again.
Then I want to say something else about what I was talking about. That Arlian and his crew are endeavoring to have an android, rather than us personally, help you dictate the recorded conversations in future. So you would only be occupied with the writing of our conversations by an android. On the other hand, if you had to record all our conversations, many of which are of a private nature, then you could do your work for us regarding. This is much appreciated, which I should explain to you especially from Girata and Jifa, and thank you for it. Both of them were very impressed by you, because...
But that does not belong here, so I will not mention it, because firstly I like doing it, and secondly it is an honor for me to be able to work for them. And if I may add the third thing, then I would like to say that I do not want to be in the foreground for that reason, and therefore it should not be mentioned. I do not want to be in the foreground in any way, because that is what all those should do who crazily think that they are worth more than other people, as is particularly the case with politicians, actors, rich people and any other greats who have to flaunt and present themselves everywhere on television and elsewhere in order to polish up their tattered and broken self-esteem, which has never been there, but will never manage to do so satisfactorily. This is because such people's affirmations are just worthless components of a nonsensical inner dialogue, as well as an idiotic auto-suggestion that causes a fundamentally erroneous, false, and harmful self-influence. Basically, this is an erroneous personal belief system of a completely false and harmful inner self-belief that influences people's thoughts and actions in such a way that it negatively restricts everything and anything in their lives. But what I want to say is that back then, probably in April 2023, Gerarda and Jifa were talking about the Nazi-minded, and I remember them saying, outside of the official conversation, that in Europe, and especially in Germany and in the EU dictatorship as well as in all EU dictatorship states in Europe, many politicians with Nazi-mindedness are vicious warmongers, whereby in Germany the political parties SPD, CDU and the 90 Bündnis Note, Bündnis 90 Die Grünen, are also vicious warmongers. Alliance 90 the Greens, or so, want to expel and ban another party that does not want war and enmity with Russia, but peace. And this is precisely because the warmongers do not want peace, but, idiotically, war. However, the stupid Nazi-minded members of the government would not realize this, just as they are biased towards Ukraine in this regard. In their stupidity, they would want to expel and ban the party striving for peace, which is why in their stupidity, they would endeavor by all possible means to infiltrate right-wing extremist elements into the party they hate and want to ban. They would also do this by fueling right-wing extremist machinations and party treason, through various elements infiltrated into the hated party.
That is indeed also our observation, because the false state powers are often warmongering, namely those you call Nazi-minded. They engage in very dangerous political intrigues and speeches on a daily basis, which, unfortunately, cannot be avoided. Especially the leadership of Germany and the EU, which you call an evil dictatorship, and which it actually is, as well as their political behavior and the influence they exert on the states that follow them, lead to. Unfortunately, this cannot be avoided, because there is no way to avert what is coming. The deliberately controlled hatred against Russia will result in the inevitable. The Russian leader Putin is equally culpable in this, because he started the Ukraine war, which he should not have done, because with enough sense and reason, and with enough patience this war could have been avoided and everything could have been properly led to a satisfactory solution, and to an all-time state of contentment.
That is probably the case when you say that, but the military head Putin lost control of everything because the then senile and idiotic US President Biden powerfully strained Putin's patience to such an extent that he lost it. Biden was really the idiot who wanted to bring the murderous organization NATO into Ukraine, with all his might and hegemonism, which Putin wanted to prevent. The effective truth was talked into the ground and thus concealed, which is why Russia and Putin are being demonized, and all the idiots of the rulers of the Western countries, vainly fueled by the Nazi-minded rulers of the EU dictatorship in Germany, have taken sides with the corrupt and war-loving Zelensky and Ukraine, and supplied them with weapons, etc. to wage war. Something that is still going on today, with the result that the war in Ukraine continues through the fault of the arms suppliers in Russia, and Putin are being made to look like pigs, and are being held guilty. This while the real culprits, namely first and foremost America, then the inflammatory and sick Nazi-minded people of the EU dictatorship and its member states, and mainly those of Germany, are kept out of it. But because of the guilt of America, which wanted to bring the NATO murderous organization into Ukraine through Biden's devilish will, and for the sake of terror, this is not being published in any media today. And the greasy, cowardly and word-breaking way in which hegemonistic America is screwing the world, and slowly eating it up, as the current American dictator is now doing with threats and a big mouth, is happening without the rulers and peoples, including Switzerland, standing up to it. They all cower out of cowardly fear and meander after the US dictator like beaten dogs, crawling up his foul-smelling arse. They all cower before him, and try to justify their political failure against this crazy, dangerous, and hegemonistic political comedian with their loudmouthness and cowardice. But just as cowardly, apparently, is the roaring majority of the approximately 340 million people of America, again, of course, excluding the minority of the righteous, to remove this government zero without violence, even if he wants to use the military and the National Guard against it. In this way, America's greatest ever dictatorial loud ruler can terrorize not only the USA, but the whole world, without the cowardly misgovernors of all the countries of the world sensing this and doing the right thing about it, together with the companies and corporations that are just as cowardly and do not do the right thing. As a result, the American dictator can ultimately have rockets built from racing bears or soapboxes in order to dominate the moon, Mars, and the entire solar space. But enough of that, because I have clearly established that not only this fake Fossiger, but also the majority of all rulers and their followers from the peoples of all countries in the world, with the exception of the vanishingly small minority of the righteous, of course display an absolutely boundless and involuntary art of real stupidity that howls up to the heavens.
And such persons are chosen as leaders of the state on earth and endorsed by followers. People who should never be appointed to such positions. That is irresponsible.
Tell me about it. I fully agree with you and with your words. And as I see it all, this is because the people of the earth are indifferent, and absolutely and completely irresponsible, do not care about knowledge of human nature, and therefore, in ignorance of who, what and how those are who they indiscriminately elect to governments and leadership positions as idiots, and self-important rabble, and even those with Nazi mindsets. Sometimes those elected are even elected by their own kind because they have been granted the right to do so, which means that those incapable of governing elect others who are incapable of governing. As a result of this, and the people's inability to make judgments, there are no people at the helm of government who would really think for the true welfare and freedom of the population, and take enlightening measures to curb its rampant overpopulation, such as a radical birth control. As a result, the planet is being more and more idiotically destroyed and built upon, and the entire fauna and flora is being robbed of its habitat, which means that the entire biodiversity is slowly but surely being wiped out, without which no life can exist, including humans. The planet is being robbed of its resources and has already been largely destroyed as a result, just like nature. But just as much of the fauna and flora that is essential for all life has been wiped out. Nonetheless, all those irresponsible and sick-thinking idiots and otherwise stupid people in government, authorities, religions, associations, groups and organizations, etc., are trying to encourage the population to promote births so that even more people populate the earth and make a pig of it, and the fauna and flora, even faster, and destroy it completely. On the whole, it is basically about hoarding even more mammon and therefore also wealth, because more and more tax money, donations and inheritance money is craved, and those demanding it can possibly enrich themselves corruptly from it. This is as corrupt as all those who wage wars as a result of their lust for war, and thus corruptly enrich themselves with war deals. And the enrichment of those who, without any sense of responsibility, unscrupulously encourage populations to nonsensically increase birth rates in order to overpopulate the earth even more. Although with an overpopulation of around 10 billion people, the world and its entire fauna and flora are already being driven faster and faster towards complete destruction. The Earth, a planet that should support no more than 500 to 530 million people, in order to be managed in every respect and in the right way, and to nurture and care for all of nature with all of its fauna and flora, is being turned into a pig, destroyed and irresponsibly and unscrupulously driven into unlivability by the massive overpopulation. This is in addition to the fact of mankind, through its insane megalomania and its immeasurable self-importance, indifference and lack of reason, as well as through its manifold greed, its addictions and its lack of conscience, is steadily and rapidly heading towards ever-increasing and rampant depravity and addiction to war and the roaring misery of inevitable, far-reaching self-destruction. but what AI or artificial intelligence will bring him when the time comes that he loses control of it will be far more than he can imagine. It is already too late to think about it now, because we have already reached the point where 1/3 of AI is being used as a control organization, but this is being fraudulently passed off to the public as progresses and good. And with regard to everything I have just said, I was talking about the overwhelming majority of wrong thinking and wrongdoing earthlings. That is to say, in no way about the minority of the righteous. Unfortunately, the mentally righteous people form only a small minority on the entire earth, who are concerned, righteous, interested in what is right, and eager to do the right thing, who are liberal, rule-abiding, equal treatment, social, loving, and generally turned towards the positive, etc. So this minority consists of people who consciously live their lives responsibly and rightly, and also fully appreciate and honor creation nature, and cherish and care for it, accordingly, instead of lying and deceivingly folding their hands in prayer for an imaginary God, and pleadingly hoping nonsensically for something, which will never become reality and truth through this God, but only by the believers in God imagining that God will help them, until this imagination is realized in some way in the believer, which he or she then effectively attributes to the non-existent God in believing stupidity.
Unfortunately, that corresponds to the truth.
Sure, you cannot even argue about that. But there is something else that needs to be clarified, namely an obvious misunderstanding about the armada that invaded the Player Federation. I understood that this happened close to Era, just as the distance of 467 light-years from Era was measured to the origin where the armada came from, which was then accepted into the Federation. That is how I understood everything. I do not understand why this was asked, and why the opinion was that the information was wrong. Have I perhaps misunderstood something?
You understood correctly.
Yes, what you say is correct, because the distance figure is actually calculated from error.
A question on my part. How big is the Onkar universe actually? I am not actually thinking of the universe itself, but of the cosmos, the matter belt, because I am wondering, what diameter in light years does it have?
We do not know. It may be billions, or very much more. We actually do not know, because it has never been able to be explored by us in such a way that we have ever got to an end region so far.
That is probably the case in every universe. Consequently, I think you can travel as far as you want, and you never come to an end. Also, from Earth, with our primitive technology of remote observation, we can probably only see as far as its limitations allow. From Earth, for example, we can observe the huge spiral galaxy Andromeda, which is around 3 million light-years away, and larger than our Milky Way. Andromeda can be seen as a blurred nebula with the naked eye, and has a supermassive black hole at its center. According to Svath, this galaxy is approaching our Milky Way, and will collide with it in about 7.6 billion years, at which point everything will be torn apart, and form into a giant galaxy.
That may be. I am not familiar with it because I do not deal with the happenings of the Dern universe. But the fact is that technology of any kind has its limits to a certain extent. These can be extended, but not infinitely.
I'm aware of that. Here I still have an answer to give to something that Bernadette from Turkey received from Burka via email about ice volcanoes, which were apparently discovered by probes on ice moons and ice planets, but which are not called ice volcanoes by scientists, as Svath called them, but cryovolcanism. I wrote an explanation of this for Berkey based on what I learned from Svath in the 1940s, when he showed me such ice volcanoes on ice planets, and icy moons on various trips around the solar system, and explained to me what they were all about. It has been about 80 years since then, but I can still remember to some extent what Svath explained to me and taught me, but I do not remember everything 100%, which is why I would be happy if you could copy my answer, and have it checked for accuracy by knowledgeable people in this matter or something, which I have just written for Berkey. A volcano like this works like a geyser. Quite naturally, heat or magmatic heat is generated underground by any magma deposits, which heats up the layers of the planet's surface or moons, but first builds up the pressure, and then, when the pressure is high enough, explodes and throws the ice, gases, and water up into the air. The surface of the ground then closes again, causing pressure to build up again in the pressure chamber, due to the heat of the magma deposits or the magnetic heat, resulting in a new eruption. So if you can photograph this and ask about it, thank you very much.
There is no need to ask about that, because I know about that it is actually the case.
Then here is what I have. How the politicians of the USA and all the states that stand by the politicians of America lie and cheat, as I have said before. But this is proven by the video and the article that Akim beamed to me. Everything points out how the mindset of America's politicians is effective, namely that it is nothing more than a Nazi mindset that has no values of anything truly good and positive, but just stinks high in the sky.
What you saw, that is really the case.
There is.
Then we will just go.
Yes. So it is still scheduled to go on until and including the 7th of December.
That is no big deal. It is just that it will affect the kilograms meeting, but that cannot be avoided.
Before we had to leave, you mentioned that you had received a newspaper article that you wanted to submit to us.
That is right, from Akim, in fact.
Let us see what he sent you.
Please, here it is, and written is how America, without batting an eyelid, meanly, unconscionably and irresponsibly broke promises made, and with lies, did exactly the opposite of what was contractually stipulated. But here is the article by Achim Wolf from Germany, dashing to the keys with coup.
And yet it was said. It is repeatedly denied that there was an agreement between the USA and Germany that NATO would not expand further east than East Germany. The recording of the Tagesschau of the 3rd of February 1990 proves that there was a promise. From minute 44, the newsreader says that Foreign Ministers Baker, USA, and Genscher, Federal Republic of Germany, had agreed on this. Quote, in Washington, Federal Foreign Minister Genscher and his American colleague Baker agreed that NATO's sphere of influence in the event of the unification of the two parts of Germany should not be extended beyond the federal territory. The video can be viewed here. The fact that Russia fought back and thus started the war in Ukraine, which was wrong and absolutely unacceptable and can never be recognized as right, was because America, through the senile President Biden, wanted to bring NATO into Ukraine, against which Russia and above all Putin resisted and started the war. This was absolutely not right, but it was the answer to America's common breach of promise that NATO would not be extended beyond the territory of Germany if the two parts of the country were united. Despite the promise, shortly after it was made, it was shamefully broken, with the result that the murderous organization NATO expanded its sphere of influence unchecked into the eastern states. When this was now also to happen with Ukraine, Russia defended itself against it with war, which was neither right nor to be advocated and, moreover, played into America's hands, taking its hegemonic mania a huge step further with the help of crazy, Nazi-minded people who, especially in Europe, hold the scepter in the governments and can live out their Nazi behavior in a warmongering manner and enjoy it without conscience and irresponsibly. And it is absolutely incomprehensible that decades later, the absolutely unscrupulous descendants of the losers of the last cruel world war, as Nazi-minded people and rulers, irresponsibly crave and agitate for war again and provoke the next one. In addition to the article, Akim also sent me the following, something I wrote in 2013 about promises, namely this. And he also beamed me a short newspaper clipping from the politician Sahara Wagenknecht.
A promise is a binding commitment, and breaking it is dishonorable and undignified. What is an oath? An oath, perjury, and what is a promise? Excerpt from the 556th Contact.
Excerpt from the 556th Contact Saturday, the 16th of March 2013, 1447, sent in by Akim Wolf. Unless unavoidable and compelling circumstances prevent the fulfillment of a promise with regard to oneself or to other people, there is never any reason not to keep a promise made to oneself or to others. If, however, a promise is broken without unavoidable and compelling circumstances, then this absolutely testifies to an unparalleled lack of honor and dignity, as well as to the fact that no respect whatsoever is shown either to oneself or to the cause of the promise and the persons involved in it, and that the promise is equivalent to a fraud and a lie. Through a promise, something is promised or explicitly and clearly assured out of free will and out of personal need, usually to one or more other people, etc., that something specific will be done, kept, and fulfilled. In this context, a promise is made that inspires hope and that it will certainly be fulfilled. In any case, a promise corresponds to a voluntary, well thought out, and absolutely binding declaration and promise that must be kept under all honorable circumstances. If, however, a person breaks a promise he has made, he becomes lacking in character, honor, and dignity, and is therefore popularly referred to as a character slob, causing even the best family relationships and friendships to fall apart. Semize Silver Star Center, the 14th of March 2013, 18.25H, Billy Sahara Wagenknecht on the main reason for the war in Ukraine, even if politicians and the mainstream media want us to believe it. The main reason for the Ukraine war is not Putin's territorial expansionism, but Russia's fear of NATO military in Ukraine. Even former NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg has confirmed that Putin started the war because he wanted to close NATO's door. And former Pope Francis also saw NATO's barking at Russia's door as a provocation. Why are the real reasons for the war in Ukraine being concealed in Germany? Does Putin really want to invade NATO? And why are armament and warmongering the real threats to peace and security in Europe? I talked to SPD veteran Klaus von Donani about these and other questions.
Unfortunately, the peoples allow these Nazi-minded elements, who, moreover, when they are supposed to decide and do something right, are far too slow in making decisions, because their thinking and actions are characterized by illogicality, inexperience, and absolutely nonsensical, illusory considerations, as a result of which they are unable to grasp and decide the right thing quickly and efficiently, and are also unable to act. This is why they need many months and years to make even the simplest decisions and carry out the necessary actions, because their stupidity or lack of thinking leads to indecisiveness and the absence of any healthy, normal thinking, of which they are incapable. They therefore waste long periods of time, such as many months and years, on decisions and actions that could be decided and carried out within a few days. But, as we say, where there is a lack of understanding and reason, hops and malt are lost.
We know that this is effectively the case. In addition, Tao endeavored to publicize the NATO, Russia and Ukraine issue and the acts of war on error and throughout the Federation, as well as to print your words and various newspaper reports, translate them into all languages, and also disseminate them.
I did not know that, but it was certainly good, because it informed in detail about the absolute incompetence of the brainless earthlings in the governments in those parts of the majority of the population, who are of the same mind as the fallible idiotic rulers, and still diligently agree with them. But you see here, all of you, I received something from Michael that absolutely perplexed me, because until now I thought that our earthly scientists were already so far along that they were aware that our sevenfold creation, which is neither God, gods, nor anything holy or created by such imaginary figures, is the origin of a very powerful energy consciousness. In other words, that the all-encompassing sevenfold creation, that is, the whole all-encompassing existential, which the earthly man simply calls nature, fauna and flora as well as the universe, is not a god or gods, or saints, but in its true origin, the gigantic energy and power of a consciousness. To put it simply, the all-encompassing sevenfold creation, which man on earth erroneously sees as a single and unique universe, and religiously believes that this created by a god, by gods or by saints, whereas it could only be created by the gigantic energy and power of the consciousness and unconsciousness of the absolute absolute. Svath taught me all this when I was not even at school. In addition to explaining from the legacy of Nocadamian, the calculation that about 529 million people was the right measure for the population of a planet, about the size of a planet like Era. The Earth, which is almost the same size as Era, can be taken as a comparison in order to do justice to all life in nature, and its fauna and flora, in such a way that no problems of food or other problems for any life forms ever arise. He also explained a great deal more in a fundamental form, for Nocadamian taught with the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life that the sevenfold creation created the universe with the cosmos and all life of fauna and flora, and thus all forms of life. This also states and explains that there is not a being called God, who allegedly created the universe, the world, or all life and human beings, but that this was and continues to be creation. It emerged from the absolute absolute as an active energy and force or creative energy and creative force, and has been active and evolving for eons of time, namely, as absolutely free nature and as a whole as everything that exists in general. All beginnings emerged from the nihilo, the absolute nothing, which became conscious and thus active in the endless duration of conscious awareness and unconsciousness, and created the being absolute, which in turn created 6 further absolute forms, whereby the last form, the absolute absolute, created the all-encompassing sevenfold creation, that is to say, the truly all-encompassing existential, which earthly man simply calls nature, fauna, and flora, and the universe, which is not a god or gods, or saints, but in its true origin the gigantic energy and power of a consciousness. Put simply, the all-encompassing sevenfold creation, which man on earth erroneously sees as the sole universe, and religiously believes to have been created by a god, gods or saints, could only have been created by the gigantic energy and power of a consciousness and its unconscious. In the beginning of everything was the primal origin, a beginning that arose solely as a result of the clear consciousness and unconsciousness of nihilo, that is to say, a gigantic, energetic, and powerful consciousness and unconsciousness that developed independently in the endless duration of the infinity of nothingness, and thus in nihilo, and became capable of creating the absolute being. And this in turn was what enabled the consciousness and unconsciousness that was also created within it to create all other absolute forms, and ultimately also the absolute absolute, which was able to create the creations, and continues to do so endlessly, in endless duration. These are all creations like ours, which has sevenfold universes in the same creation space, but in different dimensions, and is also a gigantic consciousness and harbors an unconscious within itself. Svath taught me about this important doctrine of origin at the very beginning of our contact, namely that only through the gigantic conscious energetic consciousness and unconsciousness of the nihilo could the same absolute be created. This, as only through this consciousness and unconsciousness could the 5 further lower absolute forms also be created, as well as ultimately the 7th absolute absolute, that is to say from the highest to the lowest. 1. Seen absolute 2, Sohar absolute 3, Super absolute 4, Creation absolute 5, Central absolute 6, Primordial absolute 7, Absolute absolute every absolute, from the absolute of being down to the absolute absolute, is categorized in endless duration, whereby the absolute absolute is the only absolute form that creates evolutionary creations. These constantly develop and change evolutionarily over eons of time to ever higher forms of creation, in order to ultimately enter their origin, the absolute, at the peak of their evolution, in order to continue to evolve in it over aeons of time. Once the highest level of possible evolution and the transformation of the constantly higher evolving creation has been reached, the entry into the next higher absolute form takes place, namely into the primordial absolute, in order to evolve over further eons of time, in this again to the highest level, and then to change again, into the next higher absolute form, the central absolute. This is repeated again and again over countless eons of time across all absolute forms existing in endless duration, so next via the creation absolute, then the super absolute, and further, via the Sohar absolute, up to the being absolute, which was created as the first and highest absolute form by the Nihi, and in which a conscious consciousness and unconsciousness developed in its endless duration. This consciousness alone gave rise to the stimulus for the creation of the first absolute form, the CN absolute, from which the 6 further absolute forms then emerged up to the absolute. Once creation has developed in its evolution over countless eons of time through all absolute forms, up to the SEUN absolute developed by the Nihilo, the final evolutionary process of creation takes place over further eons of time, after which it unites with the SEIN absolute and merges with it, thus entering the state of absolutely endless duration. The endless duration is the unlimited endless eon duration from the equally endless duration of the existing nihilo, the absolute nothingness, which has neither a beginning nor an end, but existed eternally in endless duration, and exists eternally in endless duration. The fact that the NEHIA in its existential endless duration is non-existence without beginning and without end is difficult for man and his understanding to grasp, because the absolute nothing or the NIHI in endless duration is to be understood as an absolutely endless eon duration, which in its existence non-existence is effectively and absolutely incomprehensible for the human mind, that is to say for man on earth, neither to be understood by his hitherto still small mind, nor by his hitherto halfway developed reason. The endless duration cannot be squeezed, explained and understood into a scheme of humanly conceived mathematics, because it is countless without beginning and end, non-existent and therefore neither explainable nor somehow calculable or comprehensible by understanding or reason. There is no way or mathematical formula to calculate the endless duration, just as there are no concepts or words to effectively describe even halfway what it fundamentally is in itself. In truth, the human mind and its reason are not capable of grasping the existence of endless duration, and the existence of an absolute nothing in its existence, non-existence, nor of understanding or calculating it in any other way. From the absolute, its energy and power emerged through its gigantic consciousness and unconsciousness, by which the first 49 simple 7-folded creations were created, which thus have 7 built as the lowest forms of creation. However, these are each differently dimensioned and absolutely in the same creation space, of which in each creation universe, one of the 7 built corresponds to the material cosmos, which is generally known to man as the visible universe with all its galaxies, nebulae, comets, meteors, suns, planets and moons, etc. But he is not aware that each universe has 7 belts, namely 3 energy belts, before the matter belt or the cosmos, as well as 3 energy belts after the cosmos. However, it is also unknown to man that, in addition to the present dimension, every universe contains countless other dimensions of the past and future, which can be traveled through by man, with the appropriate technical means. So the beginning of the becoming of all creations was only possible by creating the Seeing Absolute through the developed gigantic energetic consciousness and unconsciousness of the Nihilo, just as the other 5 absolute forms could then be created through the equally gigantic energetic consciousness and unconsciousness of the SAN Absolute. and finally as the seventh seven, the absolute absolute, absolute capable of creation. This, whereby the last, the lowest absolute absolute, in turn could only create the creations through its own and gigantic energetic consciousness and unconsciousness, one of which is ours among countless others that have been created by the absolute absolute absolutes since the primordial emergence of consciousness and its unconsciousness in nihilo. This, after the nihilo acquired its independent consciousness and unconsciousness, through the energy and power, and through this created the creation of the sane absolutum. Our creation is the one in which our earth also exists, and this, our sevenfold creation, which harbors all seven other dimensional universes in absolutely the same space, in turn has an energetic gigantic consciousness and unconsciousness, which we humans call creation consciousness. However, this is given in the form of energy, what we call creation energy, which is vitalizing for all life forms, material and immaterial, from the lowest and simplest to the very highest and most developed. These highly developed life forms, which live as fauna and flora, all have, in addition to all matter of every kind, their own powerful physical consciousness in their infinite number, as well as a subconsciousness in their form, from the very lowest, that of the existential consciousness, such as that of the simplest and lowest life forms. For example, from the simplest and lowest matter to the very highest forms of consciousness in the lowest, which are the impulse forms of consciousness, instinct forms of consciousness, as well as the absolute highest of many forms of life, the highest of which, on earth, is the human being that we know. So nothing can become and exist without the energy and power of a consciousness, and if the nihilo had not developed a consciousness, then a being absolute and no absolute forms would never, and never have emerged from it. Just as no absolute absolute, and therefore no creation like ours, with its entire nature and its fauna and flora. So it is clear and evident that our creation, our sevenfold universe, all nature and fauna and flora, could only become and develop through the existence of a consciousness that initiated and created everything in the origin. Exactly as Thoth taught me as the first teaching before he introduced me to much further knowledge. The gigantic consciousness and unconsciousness that arose in nihilo was therefore the first form, and from this arose the entire development of everything that exists, as it is given through creation, which emerged as a creation from the absolute absolute and harbors the following within itself. 1. Energy and power equals consciousness and unconsciousness of creation. 2. All-encompassing creation energy equals breathing and pulsating. 3. Creation energy equals which animates everything, and everyone equals life energy of creation. 4. Creation life energy equals energy and power of evolution, through which everything evolves. 5. Universe with 6 energy belts, 3 on each side of the matter belt or cosmos. 6. Life of all that exists in the cosmos, all mobile life forms and all matter. 7. Creation evolves itself inexorably higher in its development, and all countless simple evolutionary creations, which have been created by the absolute absolute for an endless duration, and which evolve back into the absolute absolute over eons of time, are categorized in this further evolution, after which they continue to evolve through all absolute forms in further eons of time, until they reach the absolute being, ultimately developing in it to the same level and merging with it, which annihilates permanently in eternal duration, in the infinity of the permanent nihilo. This is the development of every creation, as I have actually already explained earlier, whereby the relevant knowledge was released from the creation level, Arahat Atharsata, via the primordial herald, Nokodemian. This knowledge was released in the Ankar universe, and according to a decision of the leadership of Era and its federation, it is to be spread throughout the Ankar universe, as it is also to be taught and spread in all the other 6 universes of creation. This is the case when these life forms with physical conscious awareness and subconsciousness, such as human beings have developed their intellect and reason to such an extent that they are able to correctly grasp the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life intellectually and rationally, and adopt it. However, this has not yet happened in any of the sevenfold universes of creation. So the very first development of the dissemination of teachings is taking place here for the first time in our Dern universe of our creation. This is offered as a teaching, in accordance with the original teaching of Nocedemian, who was sent from the plane Arahat Athersata, as a herald of the teaching in the Ankar universe, and also dutifully taught it before he found his way back to the plane Arahat Athersata. And the fact that the Iranians and their federation found their way from their Ankar parallel universe to our Dern universe was the fact that through a cosmic event that took place in the Ankar universe, the Iranians became aware of a natural dimensional gateway from their Ankar universe to our Dern universe. They passed through this natural dimensional gateway, and 25 million years ago entered the space of our Dern universe, which they began to explore and arrived at the Pleiades stars. After further explorations, they also reached our area of the Milky Way, and one of its arms, and thus also our SOL system, its planets and moons, etc., and also Earth, where several attempts were made to teach and spread the teachings of the Herald Nocedemian. However, this was thoroughly prevented, and the teaching was falsified, because the people of Earth saw in various far travelers from the depths and expanses of the Drn universe who had come to Earth and their high technology, etc., which was incomprehensible to humans, deities whom they saw as gods, who had to be taught and spread. They began to worship them and recognize them as supreme beings, which gave rise to various faith groups and faith communities, which over time reconnected to form religions. Well, that should be enough to show you how it all came about, but I think you know that, do you not?
No, I do not really know anything about that.
I am not aware of any of that either.
Our tasks here on Earth are not based on a need for such knowledge, so we have not been taught about it. But it is very interesting to be able to take note of your explanations. But here again I get a signal, so
That is true. If you can tell us more bit by bit, I think we will all be interested.
For my part, too, you have stimulated my interest with your explanations. But now we have.
So be it, but I think that is enough for today. We have just heard from Enjana that she's received a signal, so now that we are back here, Michael gave me this newspaper report about a woman in Sweden who realized that only through consciousness could everything become, the universe and everything that exists. It is actually amazing that this is only being recognized now, in the year 2025.
UPPSALAUNIVERSITET, Sweden Consciousness as the Foundation. New theory of the nature of reality. Consciousness as the Foundation. New theory about the nature of reality, the 24th of November, 2025. Maria Strummy, Professor of Materials Science.
Maria Strom presents a theory according to which consciousness comes first and structures such as time, space, and matter only arise afterwards. Illustration from the article published in AIP Advances. Consciousness is fundamental. Only then do time, space, and matter emerge. This is the starting point for a new theoretical model of the nature of reality presented by Maria Stroma, Professor of Material Science at Uppsala University in the scientific journal AIP Advances. The article was selected as the best contribution in the issue and featured on the cover. Stroma, who normally conducts research in the field of nanotechnology, makes a big leap here from the smallest to the largest scales and proposes a completely new theory about the origin of the universe. The article presents a framework in which consciousness is not seen as a byproduct of brain activity. but as a fundamental field that underlies everything we experience: matter, space, time, and life itself. Is this a completely new theory about how reality and the universe are structured? Yes, you could say that. But, above all, it is a theory in which consciousness comes first, and structures such as time, space, and matter only emerge afterwards. It is a very ambitious attempt to describe how our experienced reality works. Physicists such as Einstein, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, and Planck have explored similar ideas, and I am building on several of the avenues they have opened up, says Strama. Combining quantum physics and philosophy for many years, Strama has been working on a quantum mechanical model that combines quantum physics and non-dual philosophy. The theory is based on the idea that consciousness is the fundamental element of reality and that individual consciousnesses are parts of a larger interconnected field. In this model, phenomena that are considered mysterious today, such as telepathy or near-death experiences, can be explained as natural consequences of a shared field of consciousness. My aim was to describe this using the tools of physics and mathematics. Are these phenomena really mystical? Or is there simply a discovery we have not made yet, and when we do, will it lead to a paradigm shift? Similar shifts in our understanding of reality have happened before in history. For example, when humanity realized that the Earth is round and not flat, or when we understood that it is not the sun that orbits the Earth, but the other way around. A new image of the nature of reality. Strom believes that this could be the beginning of a new way of looking at the universe and the life we think we live. Her article contains several testable predictions from the fields of physics, neuroscience, and cosmology. In doing so, she takes a big step outside her usual field of research in material science. Her theory also states that our individual consciousness does not end with death, but returns to the universal field of consciousness from which it once emerged. She has also formulated this in quantum mechanical terms. I am a material scientist and engineer, so I am used to thinking of matter as something fundamental. But according to this model, matter is secondary. Much of what we experience is representation or illusion, says Strom. A theory that harmonizes science and ancient knowledge. Although the article is written strictly in the mathematical language of physics, the argument has parallels with several of the world's religious and philosophical traditions. The texts of the great religions, such as the Bible, the Quran, and the Vedas, often describe an interconnected consciousness. The authors of these texts used metaphorical language to express insights into the nature of reality. Early quantum physicists, in turn, arrived at similar ideas using scientific methods. Now it is time for hardcore science, modern science, to seriously start exploring this, says Strama. Annika Holth. Translated with DeepL.com free version.
That is interesting. It makes me wonder how this woman originally started to figure out this truth.
That is really remarkable.
I do not know that either, but we probably will not be able to find out, so something else. I recently had a telephone inquiry, and I was asked whether the forms of marriage on Era and throughout the Federation were known and also commonplace as they are here. So I was asked specifically about the following forms, which I also wrote down during the telephone conversation, and I know what they are. But I did not know 6, because I would never heard of it before, so I had to look it up on the internet to find out what it clearly means and what it is all about. So I know what the following forms are: heterosexuality, normal woman and man, or also transsexuality, gender identity as the opposite sex from the sex assigned at birth, polygamy, the marriage of one person to multiple partners. Term is divided into 2 main forms. Polygyny, man has multiple wives. Polyandry, woman has multiple husbands. Lesbianism, woman to other women. Homosexuality, man and man. Sodomy, zoophilia, sexual intercourse with animals. Asexual people with this form often feel no sexual attraction to other people, but this does not mean that they are averse to romantic relationships or affection. Pedosexuality, pedophilia, is predominantly sexual activity with children, whereby pedophilia is more correctly called pedosexuality, and corresponds to a disorder of sexual preference. This is based on sexual abuse by women and men in relation to children, although it is mainly male pedosexual abuse that is referred to, while female pedosexuality is generally concealed, and very little or nothing at all is known about it, even though it has existed effectively since time immemorial. However, pedosexuality, contrary to the false claims of all earthly know-it-alls, is not only practiced in such a way that only pubescent or sexually mature boys and girls are sexually abused, but also children in general, from a pre-pubescent age. In this respect, even infants are sometimes abused for sexual gratification, by which the sexual inclination towards them, as towards children in general, and their youthfulness conveys an enormous attraction. With regard to puberty, it should also be explained that this is associated with a physical change that brings about both hormonal and mental maturity changes that, depending on the intelligence, last until the age of 21, but can continue for a longer period of time if they are abnormal. Puberty occurs according to physical development, which was different in earlier times than it is today, and its development in this respect. Consequently, it can occur in precocious girls between the ages of 8 and 12, whereas in boys it only occurs between the ages of 11 and 15. During sexual maturity development, the regularity of the important wake-sleep rhythm is disrupted, which can take up to 6 years to normalize. However, I did not know what the following forms meant, so I had to look it up, and learnt the following: pansexuality, attraction to people regardless of their gender, including non-binary people, gender-fluid or intersex people. But the attraction is to the person themselves, or their individual characteristics, personality and character, not actually their gender. Omnisexuality, sexual orientation that is sexually and/or emotionally attracted to all genders. Abrosexual orientation of sexual attraction that fluctuates and changes greatly over time. Polysexual people feel attracted to several genders, but not necessarily to all of them. Polyamory, a form of relationship in which people have romantic and loving relationships with several people at the same time. Demisexual sexual attraction is only felt once a deep emotional bond and trust has been established. What do you know about whether this is the same in your Arrow population and in the individual populations of the Federation, or whether it is different?
I think it is the same as on Earth, because I think it is the same for all higher and higher life forms that reproduce and satisfy themselves sexually. This simply corresponds to my personal assumption, because I am not aware of any instruction in this regard through a course or study to learn this knowledge.
To that end, I think that for you Playaran, it is probably a general education developed through hearing and saying etc., just like for us.
That is my judgment as well.
I have the same view on that, because my findings in that regard are of that kind.
Exactly. You do not have to be a scientist to personally acquire general knowledge, because being attentive, using your hearing, and using your eyes to see, that is enough to continuously form and expand your personal general knowledge.
That corresponds to my view as well.
Svath already told me that in the 1940s, namely that I should form my personal general knowledge, but that I can only expand it by always being attentive, keeping my ears open, and also my eyes, so that I can see what is really going on. However, he also taught me that I should keep quiet about what I personally perceive in my fellow human beings, and only talk about this or that if I am personally asked to do so by them. However, this is completely different if any things, incidents, orders, actions, laws, behavior, or regulations, etc., including political or religious ones, are enacted or implemented that have a harmful and therefore negative impact on people, nature, and its flora and fauna. It is then unquestionably an absolute duty to openly point this out and object to it so that it can be effectively rectified, made right, and applied correctly. This is because mistakes in any way are invariably damaging, and must therefore be pointed out, corrected, and handled correctly, without violence. However, this does not mean that pointing out and criticizing something that is wrong and incorrect should degenerate into agitation against it, but should only serve to rectify and correct what has been pointed out and criticized. Therefore, it is not part of my job, nor am I interested, and this should be made clear, in agitating against any government or religion in order to take action against one, or even to form a group that is directed against a person, a political party or a government, against a religion or sect, or to attack them verbally, in writing or otherwise in an inflammatory or physical manner, or to harass or even destroy them in any other way. What I do has nothing of the sort in or of itself, for I only point out what is wrong and incorrect, as well as what can or should be done correctly. I never do this in such a way that something should be done, demanded or forbidden in an inflammatory way, because every person is responsible for himself in every way, and has to go to market with his own skin, and so this also applies to every group and organization, which I can name at any time according to their actions and activities. If a person is addicted to a belief and thus to make-believe thinking, and is thus, for example, attached to a religion, then that is absolutely up to him. Because every person has to know for himself and thus for himself, whether he wants to be make-believing and believing, or whether he wants to be completely and absolutely clearly aware and responsibly self-thinking and thus independent, in terms of belief and completely open to reality and effective truth. This must be truthful, and in no way forbidden to him, for it is always and at all times the free will of man to move mentally and emotionally in his own personal opinion, to allow himself to be indoctrinated, or to educate himself in an absolutely conscious manner, and to form his own views and behavior in this or that respect. This is insofar as they are right, and not harmful to fellow human beings, peace, the security of the state, the whole of creation and therefore nature and flora and fauna. In the same way, it is also up to the individual, if he has, and represents a Nazi attitude, is politically misguided and confused, politically pursues a way of governing that is completely wrong, and anti-popular, anti-freedom, anti-opinion, or otherwise incorrect. And it is the same for the individual person who follows a religious belief, because that is also his own business, in which absolutely nobody should interfere and let him live according to his own way of thinking. I also abide by this, because I do not address anyone about their religious belief or non-belief, but I can and may take the liberty of calling every belief and the obligatory military as well as every political party, religion and sect completely indoctrinating and false, because these fraudulently keep people away from their very own free will and conscious self-thinking through belief, indoctrination or coercion. This is the effective reality and truth. But every person must decide for himself whether he wants to be deceived by his faith of any kind, or whether he wants to be made a fool of and harmed by coercion or obligation. However, when I point out that every religious and sectarian belief of man is an evil deception of himself, I am not attacking the believer, but merely pointing out in general terms what religion and belief actually are, namely self-deception, without attacking anyone as a believer. I do the same with politics and the compulsory military coercion, because the military is and always will be a murderous organization. In every respect, and peace truly only exists as a pseudo-peace in a state of rest, as it exists throughout the world, but can unexpectedly erupt into violence at any time. All rulers and politicians in general, as well as their supporters and other like-minded people, who irresponsibly create a compulsory state law or even just advocate that young people should be forcibly conscripted into the military and for military service, are potential murderers who should be locked up for life, and really, forever. The military is in any case a murderous organization, and war is compulsory murder and destruction ordered by the state, which should never be. What is called peace on earth is in reality only pseudo-peace, because this was given at some point in the past by some end of war, namely by the victorious party, which has since then kept the peace with strict laws or wants to keep it, and thus calls this peace. and this was later adopted and maintained as a principle by countries or states that became independent, which try to keep out of a war or any war, but nevertheless maintain a military murder army for deterrences and protection, which, however, erroneously conveys the belief that the murder organization could still defend the country victoriously in the event of an overwhelming attack, which, however, would pointlessly cause many deaths. This, however, is the case with every military, an organization that murders on occasion, recruiting all those capable of war from the population by compulsory service in order to train them as murderers, who then kill other people, men, women, and children unknown to them, without hesitation in uprisings and wars, etc., as well as causing immense destruction. This, while all those who, as murderers in command, cause uprisings and wars, or simply have them carried out by their military, squat in safety, loll around comfortably, eat and drink well, and stay away from any danger, even though they are the ones who want violence, who should be on the war front and beat each other's skulls bloody. All these elements, whom I call Nazi-minded, I do not understand as National Socialists, but as only absolutely destructive idiots, as well as warmongers, murderers, power-hungry, and uneducated despisers of human life, of all nature, and its fauna and flora. They are morally depraved elements, who only see themselves and their own welfare, who only live out their delusions of power and see their horrendous rewards, who only think for themselves, who sit in governments and populistically bully the people in every possible way. All this while the fair-minded and well-intentioned, who lead a shadowy existence in government, are disregarded and not listened to. Unfortunately, however, I have to refrain from naming and shaming the misguided rulers and the countries that I denounce for their wrong actions, that are harmful to the people, but just as with religions, I refrain from inciting hatred against them and jeopardizing them in any way, but only from pointing out the ways in which they act incorrectly and wrongly. Unfortunately, this is not enough, so that all those who belong to this pack can continue unchecked, unscathed and unnamed, because if I were to mention their names and countries, it would be inevitable that the police would turn up at my house to really beat me up, as has been happening secretly for decades because I openly tell the truth. But I do this without incitement, violence, or malice, but only by pointing out how wrongly the whole thing is handled in its application, etc., and how the perpetrators of the underhand attacks against me believe they can make a fool of me. Michael and I have largely taken the power out of these attacks by. Consequently, there has been some calm. There was also some calm because, which had also been overheard and photographed by visitors to the center, including visitors from America, France, and Germany, including, who came to me secretly, and, are members of the government in Germany, but are opposed to the Nazi-minded people. Also the two from here in, which I can only tell you.
But what you say is to be concealed. Moreover, what you have already said so far will not please those who feel caught in their wrongdoing, and in their way of the wrong and abominable of their anti-people machinations.
That will probably be the case, whereby those stupid people who support the wrongdoing rulers, and are of the same mind as them, will howl along. It will be.
Here I am back again, greetings to all, and as I found no one in attendance at the station, I knew you were together here, which is why I come here. So, everyone say hello.
This is really a surprise, my friend. Really. But I am glad you are back.
Of course, you do not understand our language. We said hello to each other.
Sure, it is just a surprise, because we usually speak Swiss German, but I do not understand your language. It is clear and normal that you communicate with each other in your mother tongue. But welcome back, Quetzal, and I am really pleased that you are here again. You can take the chair in the back.
No, I will join you on the sofa. It is all right.
My appearance has interrupted your conversation. What were you talking about?
It was just the moment when I wanted to say that people only ever swear about Russia, while the guy Zelensky, the warmonger of the Ukraine, is hailed to the skies, who is the inhibitor and does not want to end the war because he does not want to give up his secretly operating corruption, and thus the wealth he's scamming with it. However, he knows how to conceal the effect of truth, so as not to be recognized as a corrupt person himself, by making big speeches against all those who are corrupt, even though he himself is also enriching himself absolutely outrageously through corruption, etc., as you, Bermunda, have long since discovered. On top of that, the guy has the impertinent cheek to insult and denigrate others who do the same, in order to distract attention from himself. And the fact that certain elements in America and also in Europe are helping him to do this, as you have realized, is the bottom of the barrel. What is going on and what is going on all around, and the fact that the media are still involved, printing and publishing lies upon lies, and how they are distorting or concealing the real truth, that is just sky high. But the readership consumes everything, and believes it without questioning anything, even when something is proclaimed by their own country's government and the truth is distorted. This is particularly the case when the evil, self-important populists in the governments simply ignore certain election results of the people and claim that they cannot be properly implemented for this or that reason, because this or that speaks against it, or because the situation has changed, and therefore the people's voice cannot be realized. This is how lousy populism is rampant in governments around the world, as a result of which their fallible leaders simply disregard the people's election results at their own discretion, and make decisions and act as they see fit, which leaves the people indifferent, and the fallible rulers to muddle on as they see fit. The same is also the case in Israel with Netanyahu, which is why the mass murderer can continue to do as he pleases. Although he has long been accused of corruption, etc., it remains to be seen whether the President of Israel will do his duty, and whether Netanyahu can expect a nasty court case as a result. He is now begging the President of Israel, Yitzhak Herzog, who is a lawyer by profession, for mercy and acquittal, and time in the proverb that one crow does not peck out another's eye will show whether he is really fair and incorruptible in his office, and does not respond to the begging request. Well, the fact is, if I now want to talk about the fact that you come from the Onkar universe to bring the teaching of Nocademian, which is not based on faith but on reality and truth, then this also means that peace is taught, which is your profession, and which you also want to convey through the teaching. But this means that real peace is also taught and connected with it, which you have been cultivating on Era and in the entire Federation for almost 53,000 years according to the earthly calendar. To which Svath said that the promotion of peace on earth is of very great importance, and also extremely important in addition to the dissemination of teachings. Semyuze also said the same, and both instructed me to emphasize and teach that only true peace among peoples, and therefore especially among individuals, brings progress worth living for, true knowledge and true freedom. And in order to realize this true peace, it is necessary to carry out urgent educational work that calls all the facts by their right names. This, for example, in such a way that religious and sectarian beliefs prevent people from thinking for themselves, and prevent them from recognizing the truth to the point of proverbial blindness, thereby also preventing peace. This is because the deception and lies associated with it are promoted so extensively and uninhibitedly by the court. Erroneous belief that it becomes almost or as good as impossible for the individual citizen of the earth to grasp what is presented to him through deception and lies, and received by him in faith as deception and lies. Consequently, he is indoctrinated by them to such an extent that he is unable to recognize and grasp the actual truth, and simply believes what is presented to him fraudulently and mendaciously. So everything should be called by its right name. So I called something similar to what Svath called it. For example, he used the term murderous mob for every military, without exception, which I then quickly renamed murderous organization and have kept it that way to this day.
That is how he recorded it in his annals.
That probably made an impression on him. which is why he made a note of it, I imagine. Basically, every military is effectively nothing other than a negative organization that is geared towards murder, destruction, and absolutely only towards death, grief, misery, hardship, and ruin, never creating peace, but on the contrary, only causing evil, hatred, and malice. Moreover, the military is certainly something that man cannot and can never use to create peace, as has been proven since time immemorial, because it has only ever led to war, murder, torture, massacre, destruction, and rape, etc. Ultimately, and without exception, the victors of the wars carried out summary judgments and executions against the losers, just as new laws, regulations, ordinances, and rules, etc. were introduced, for which, if they were not strictly adhered to immediately, the occupiers carried out harsh punishments and death sentences. And so it continues when new wars are waged, and the victors of war have conquered the land and subjugated the defeated peoples, as they have done since time immemorial. In this way, mankind has always used groups of murderers and the military or large murderous organizations to wage wars, murder, destroy, and create a great deal of suffering and misery. Even in the earliest times, the earthlings formed themselves into evil, negative and murderous groups, and thus formed murderous organizations that viciously slaughtered people, destroyed everything, and caused unspeakable suffering, misery, and hardship. And the more technological development progressed, the more it was misused for the development and manufacture of weapons for the purposes of warfare, murder, and destruction, up to the development of the atomic bomb and the dropping of such bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and their complete destruction, as well as the unscrupulous murder of hundreds of thousands of innocent people by the Americans. It was an unparalleled crime of mass murder for which America's leaders have never been held accountable, just as the American dictator can apparently continue his criminal behavior and hegemony, without the American people rising up against it, or the world community doing anything to end his power, without weapons and war, but with reason and understanding. But apparently the powerful rulers of the world states are just wimps without brains, yet they are absolutely loud-mouthed enough to be able to assert themselves as sham rulers, and to have foolish supporters among the people. Well, since time immemorial, things have been getting worse, worse and worse, because the wars became more and worse. And the increase in humanity on Earth also contributed to this, because the more offspring the Earthlings produced, the narrower the world became for humanity on Earth. The mass of humanity became larger and larger, and grew into overpopulation, so that already in the year 1700 after Emmanuel crime, the Earth-compatible measure of 530 million people according to the census of the Pleiaren was already far exceeded, because at that time 536,718,004 Earthlings were counted by you Aarons, as I read here on my list. However, more people on the small Earth mean that this rampant overpopulation has to live closer and closer together, and is now practically squatting on each other, in such a way that everything inevitably leads to friction. Consequently, quarreling, strife, hatred, and enmity can no longer be avoided, which inevitably leads to discord and wars. The quarrels and wars, which are caused for whatever rather idiotic reasons, spread very quickly and can hardly be stopped, if at all. Disputes and quarrels increasingly spill over into families and neighborhoods, often ending in destruction or even murder and manslaughter. And when rulers create and provoke discord among a people or among several peoples, for whatever completely illogical, erroneous, and confused reasons, there are never logical reasons for this, but instead they idiotically cause war and terror, as well as boundless suffering, misery, roaring misery, and the total destruction of human achievements. In addition to the fact that nature and its fauna and flora are also maliciously damaged, and for the most part, idiotically and unscrupulously turned into a pig, or even completely wiped out. Peace, effective true peace, can only be brought about by clear understanding and effective reason, and completely without violence, and then also really be given, And indeed only as a result of independent, clear, and intelligent thinking, which proves absolutely clearly that they are hostile, quarrelsome, hateful, deceitful, and lying people, whose intelligence is screamingly low, and therefore void and vanishingly small. Their lack of understanding, and their thoughts and endeavors are geared towards enmity, quarreling, hatred, harassment, ragging, and, in a very evil form, cheating, lying and lack of understanding, or even deliberately provoking war. It can even be so idiotically aimed at forcing others into war, and actually provoking one, as happened with Russia, for example, which then ultimately attacked Ukraine with its murderous organization, at Putin's will and command, and is still waging war today. President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin gave the order, but the Russian federal government is headed by Mikhail Mishustin, as Prime Minister Mishustin II cabinet, since May 2024. However, the president is the most powerful position and plays a decisive role in determining policy, while the prime minister is the head of government and implements the executive power, making the Russian political system a presidential parliamentary republic with strong presidential power. The war happened, or rather came about, to the fault of the senile, decrepit American ex-president Joseph Joe Biden, who threatened and agitated for so long to bring the murderous organization NATO into Ukraine until Russia, or President Putin, blew a gasket and started the war. Biden has had a stammer since childhood, which he was never able to cure, but which did not affect him in office, although he was, and remains, greedy for power and an outspoken enemy of Russia. Rulers who order a war and have it carried out, as well as all the members of the murderous organizations that wage and carry out the war, thereby commit murder and manslaughter, as well as rape, and they also indulge in the practice of destruction, which overall indicates an absolute lack of intelligence on the part of those ordering and carrying out the order. Consequently, they have neither intellect nor reason in their thoughts and actions, which is why it is hopeless for them to try to achieve anything meaningful and responsible. Peace and freedom are an ornament to mankind, as are the equality and equal value of women and men, and therefore also with regard to one person and another. And human freedom includes the right to know reality and its full truth, and not simply to have to accept every deceitful and mendacious rubbish of a religious or other faith as correct. Without true understanding and effective reason and absolute non-violence of equality, there can never be human unity, and therefore also no peace, and there can never be a free humanity that can live together in righteousness and in self-thinking on an equal footing. Only true peace and true freedom in the individual human being lead to living life freely, openly and correctly as well as blamelessly, while deception and lying as well as distortion of the truth only cause discord, lack of freedom in everything that is false, evil, and negative, as is inherent in every religious and other belief of every kind, manner and form, because every belief deviates absolutely from every reality and its truth. Because every belief is only self-deception, deception, fantasy, hallucination, or indoctrinated deception, and lies. However, indoctrinated deceit and lies can also be found in all politics and in most of the media, although only a few media outlets can be considered honest and open. Most of them cheat and lie through their teeth and are easily manipulated by politicians. And it is precisely these people who are then believed, precisely those who are otherwise already believers. But as for the corrupt Zelensky, whom I also want to mention, whom unfortunately many truth-blind and war-minded and warmongering rulers from all over Europe, as well as the mad dictator of America, Trump, believe in his theatrical deceptions and lies, and do not know or hide his corrupt machinations, which you, Bermunda, have fathomed and uncovered yourself. The newspaper article that Acom has been to me, and which I do not want to hide from you, should also prove that.
That everything is geared towards wealth. I think that is also the case in this way with regard to everything that arises all round concerning religious belief, which came about through lies and deceit, and has since cost many millions of lives, and which has survived to this day.
While I do not see a direct connection to what I was talking about, I think you are right about the scamming of wealth. But if I may now present you with the article, Loa.
In 1995, Zelensky completed his law studies in Kiev with a degree. Only then did Zelensky switch to acting. Dutch politicians have still not received an answer to the question from Zelensky, Mr. Zelensky, how did you make your immense private fortune? Anyone who supports the Zelensky regime with financial donations is highly suspected of corruption, especially those politicians who like to personally carry their briefcases to Kiev.
And the character inclination of this lying, deceitful, war-obsessed, corrupt and power-hungry man in his falsehood is undoubtedly expressed quite blatantly by his physiognomy. His warmongering attitude and his falseness are unmistakably written on his face.
It fully confirms the findings of my investigations. This man is a terrible, dangerous swindler and warmonger, who is also a corrupt and extremely deceitful person, who in his deceitfulness cunningly deceives the leaders of those states and wins them over, so that they help him and woo him. But the misguided do not realize that he is the real reason why the war will not end, and they pay homage to this man who should be removed from office and imprisoned, and through whom much harm is done, and the war, the killing, and the destruction continue.
Effectively, and to this I say that even his whole nature is undoubtedly roaringly expressed. And I am sure you all realize that, because I do not think you are all uneducated in psychological terms, if I am not mistaken. At least I think so, because you all said that you would endeavor to educate yourselves in this subject, that in order to be able to better judge and understand us earthlings, you would endeavor to carry out useful studies. Consequently, I think you all realized and learned to understand some things years ago, which is why this picture certainly reveals nothing new to you from this slime ball.
I have to agree with that, because we have all come together and made a concerted effort to gain in-depth knowledge in this regard and gain correct judgments through authoritative fathoming.
Once again, I can confirm that in full.
That is so, and therefore the question of the expression of this man's physiognomy is really open to recognize that this is a devious, malicious, as well as badly lying, deceiving earthling.
And he could, in my opinion, be teamed up with the Israeli mass murderer Netanyahu.
But regarding Ukraine, the situations there have always been quite nasty, because the very evil that occurred years ago and continues to occur is proven by the newspaper article you received and gave us in March 2023, which you should show us again now, speaking of the evils in Ukraine. Although Zelensky had nothing to do with the events at the time, he is of the same mind and actions as the guilty parties at the time.
Whatever you say. What do you say? Okay, your nodding head is my command, so I will look for it in the computer. Yes, here. There it is, and I will copy it out straight away.
Many journalists and over 300 miners are on the Ukrainian government's death list.
Since 2014, the Ukrainian government has been operating a website via an intermediary Ungo that lists the names and addresses of many people that Kiev considers to be opponents of Ukraine. Many of the people listed there have already been murdered. By Thomas Roper, the 9th of September 2022, 1816 hours in Ukraine, the Yango Center Mirotvorets was founded after the Maidan and put the website Mirotvorets Peacemaker online. The Ango describes itself as a center for research into signs of crimes against the national security of Ukraine. Of Ukraine, peace, humanity, and international law, and its website lists people that the Ango has declared to be opponents of Ukraine. These people are listed with their personal data, often even with their private address, telephone number, passport number, and so on. The Ukrainian government's death list, many of the people who were listed there were murdered shortly afterwards. This began back in 2014 with the murder of Ukrainian journalist Oles Bazina, who was critical of the Maidan and was shot dead in Kiev just 2 days after being listed on the site in April 2014. Journalist Daria Dugina, who was recently murdered in Moscow, was also placed on the list shortly before her murder. After the death of people published on the list, their photo is overwritten in red letters with the word liquidated. It is therefore no exaggeration to describe the Mirotvort site as a Ukrainian death list. The site is so blatantly supported by the Ukrainian government, namely the Ministry of the Interior and the SPU Secret Service, that you can even read about it, at least for now, in the German Wikipedia. It is therefore fair to speak of a Ukrainian government death list. In Made in Ukraine, political murders of government critics have not been uncommon since the Maidan. I have reported on this time and again. German quality media, however, do not find this worth mentioning, although most of the political murders in Ukraine are committed against people who have previously been put on the death list. The list includes people from many different countries. Journalists are also put on the list, and my name is also on it. A total of 14 journalists are currently on the list, 80 of them from Western countries, and the addresses of 109 of them have even been published. This is an invitation to do something to these people. Even more shocking, if that is even possible, is the fact that around 300 minors are also on the list. Among them, for example, is the 14-year-old girl Faina Savinkova from Lugansk, whose crime consists of writing open letters to politicians and activists, including the UN worldwide, in which she calls for an end to the terror bombardment of her hometown of Lugansk, which the Ukrainian army has been carrying out since 2014, and where Faina grew up. Western values. Western governments are of course aware of all this. They are also aware that their own citizens are on the list. A government's top priority should actually be to protect its own citizens. But even after former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder was put on the death list, the German government did not consider it necessary to intervene in Kiev. Instead, the German government tersely stated in response to an inquiry, "We have already made our position clear to the Ukrainian side in the past, and we have insisted that the Ukrainian government work towards the deletion of this website. We will do the same now." These were just fine words, because nothing happened. Instead of pushing for the website to be deleted, the German government has continued to support the Ukrainian government with billions, and now also with weapons. Would the German government remain so passive if there was such a death list in Russia? The much vaunted Western values are just empty words used to lull the stupid public. In practice, Western governments authorize public death lists when it seems politically opportune. Western governments are indifferent to the fact that they even call for the murder of children. Regimes that are obedient to the West are allowed to publicly call for political murders in Ukraine, or even brutally murder journalists in their consulate Saudi Arabia without any consequences. An issue for the Russian Ango Fund to Combat Repression hosted a press conference in Moscow on the 6th of September, at which 9 international journalists on the Ukrainian death list spoke about this. As Alina Lip and I are also on this list, we were also invited. There was also a US American, a Canadian, a French woman, a Finn, a Dutch woman, a Briton, and a woman who has 3 nationalities, Ukrainian, Russian, and German. The aim of the press conference was for Mirotvort to finally be declared a terrorist organization in Russia, and for Russia to raise the issue of Mirotvort at the UN. But of course Western politicians, who supposedly stand for human rights, and Western media will continue to spread the cloak of silence over this and other crimes of the Ukrainian Nazi regime. You will forgive me if I cannot describe a government that maintains such a death list, on which I and many of my friends are also listed, in any other way. If the internet had existed in Nazi times, the S would surely have run a site similar to the one the Ukrainian government does.
That corresponds exactly to what we know, and have also established and verified. Namely that it really corresponds to the facts, although this work of Zelensky and his like-minded people is kept secret from the Ukrainian people, and they are kept ignorant and lied to and deceived.
You have already told me that on various occasions. But here I have another question. Although there is no return address, dear Billy Meyer, Can you please give me an answer in one of your contact reports? How long has the Sahara been in existence? Thank you for your answer. Greetings, F. Breuer. My answer? If I remember correctly what Svath taught me, its beginning is said to date back to about 7,000 years ago, whereby this desert will continue to expand for a very long time from today. But what I want to talk about now is what you, Bermunda, as well as Enjana and Florena, asked when we spoke some time ago about the beginnings of my work in Hinwil. I said something then that I wanted to tell you that you did not know yet, and that I had forgotten to tell you, but it came up with us again recently, and I remembered that I had forgotten to tell you. There was Hans Jakob von Weizsäcker, a man who was a religious freak and a believer in witches, back in the 20th century, who turned up at my house on Wehaldenstrasse in Hinwil several times, along with others. One day he came and claimed that he had seen me driving past his house on a moped, coming from Hitnau, and that the devil had been sitting behind me on the carrier, and waving at him. That is why he wanted nothing more to do with me, because I was a witch, and now he came to me and asked me to talk to the devil, to leave him alone, because he wanted nothing to do with him. As I know, he spread his crazy hallucination, not only in Switzerland, but also in Germany, England, and America, because I was written to several times about it, and even called an evil sorcerer on the phone. Then it happened that I saw him again a few years later, for the last time in Wetzikon Hospital when I visited my father, who had been hospitalized there with pneumonia. That was when Hans Jakob was admitted to the ward, and he said that the devil obviously wanted it that way so that he could get him now, because he was ill, and could no longer defend himself, and was helpless, and so on.
That was crazy.
What came of it then?
Not much really, because I just told him that he was obviously still living in the early days, 1,000 or more years before the time when Christianity and Islam came into being, because back then people already believed in the evil of a devil being, and that people were in league with it, and had been endowed with magical powers by it. And even back then, if these people, who were usually experts in nature, and produced natural remedies, were caught, they were all accused of being sorcerers and wizards and tortured and executed, in the most evil ways. But it was also inevitable to tell him that he was talking nonsense, and fantasizing terrible and diabolical things in fear for nothing, because there was no devil, and what he had seen was just a hallucination of faith. But it did not work, because he insisted that he had seen me on the moped with the devil, and that the devil had waved at him as he drove past. I learnt just how fanatical the believers in the devil are when I was with Svath. In Europe alone, more than 600,000 women were tortured and murdered as alleged witches, and a few witches also had to suffer the same. I have talked about this before, but unfortunately the real number was falsified by typing errors or tampering, and only about half of the actual number was given. Many alleged witches were recognized, tortured, and murdered because they hallucinated and told nonsensical experiences. This happened because they were addicted to, which was made from, and rubbed into their bodies. The effect was to induce an unconsciousness-like sleep lasting several hours, which caused confused, crazy dreams that took the form of the witchcraft illusions of the time. This, of course, encouraged the insane and confused belief in witches and the persecution of witches in the late Middle Ages and early modern times, which lasted from around 1450 to 1750, although the worst period was probably the 100 years from 1550 to 1750. After that, the belief in witchcraft slowly weakened, although a sectarian system nevertheless kept the belief in witches alive in some areas, with the result that witch hunts and witch trials, and witch tortures and witch murders, continued until the end of the 18th century, with very evil and wicked waves of persecution rampant, and bearing their evil fruit. In Switzerland, the last alleged witch in Europe, Anna Geldi, was officially executed in 1782. You can also find a lot about this on the internet. So the belief in witches lasted a long time in the Middle Ages, as did women's addiction to the addictive paste, which can be equated with drug addiction worldwide today. However, this phase of addiction at that time was hushed up and is still hushed up today, as is its composition of, and, whereby this addictive paste was then rubbed onto the body. This is in contrast to the way injections, tablets, powders and capsules etc. are used today. So this is the addictive nature of drugs. But it is already the case that the world today looks very bad in terms of people, because many are becoming more and more unscrupulous and depraved, as well as dumber and more stupid. This was also shown on television, where interviews were conducted with young people on the streets and they were shown around 30 or 35 large cardboard clocks and asked what time they were telling. But the young people were no longer able to do this, and were only able to read the digitally displayed time on their mobile phones. It was also reported in the news that domestic violence occurs every 3 minutes in Europe, and that hardly a day goes by without the murder of a woman, a wife or other woman, or girl. Recently it has even come to light that in various countries parents together or fathers alone lock up their daughters for decades and sexually abuse them, and when they become pregnant and give birth to children, they are summarily murdered. So humans are becoming more and more degenerate, worse than wild animals, which have no conscious and clear thinking, no conscious emotions, and no controllable feelings like humans, but only an instinctive ability in every respect. This is quite apart from the fact that wild animals do not simply kill their own kind. If humans were once man-eaters or cannibals in prehistoric times, this state and time are long gone, but the people of the earth should have evolved so much since then that they should have become real humans. However, this is not the case, because this only applies to a minority, while the majority of earthly humanity continues to live in the old style, and is unwilling to turn to clear reason and a valuable intellect, as well as to effective reality and its truth. But this would be connected with effective self-thinking, which requires effort, energy and strength, as well as clear understanding and true reason, in complete contrast to faith, which requires no effort, thinking ability and also no efficiency, but only a completely senseless reception and acceptance of the absurd, the stupidly stupid, the ludicrous, the nonsensical, and the useless, the senseless, and the senselessly senseless, such as the unnecessary, the nonsensical and the rubbish, as well as the absolutely pointless.
This, I think, includes what you once said, in the believer's ear.
That is probably useless, because believers cannot be dissuaded from their faith simply by truths, but only by suffering great harm as a result of their delusion of faith, which enters them and brings true realization. Or believers fall away from their delusion of faith when, due to some circumstances, their intellect, reason, and illusory thinking are no longer suppressed by their faith, and consequently begin to work in a correct and logical manner. But there may also be other reasons by which believers become aware of the nonsense of their faith, for all the paths that lead to understanding and reason are as manifold as so many things, and all the emerging events of life are unfathomable in advance.
That such a thing comes about, however, should correspond to a rarity, just as earth people who are trapped in a belief find understanding and reason and realize that a deity is only an imagination and divine appearances, experiences and aids and the like only correspond to belief-related hallucinations.
You can say that out loud, because the faith of believers is so ingrained that it cannot be countered even by an end of the world. Because truly delusional believers would see the will of their imaginary God in their delusions of faith, probably claiming that God is thereby punishing all the sins of mankind. This, as someone recently told me on the phone, that God would punish the depravity of mankind, because it would not be very long before he, this same God, would blow up the supervolcano, or the Phlegrean Fields caldera, or the Campi Flegrei, the burning fields, in the very densely populated volcanic area near Naples in Italy. This, like the Eiffel caldera in Germany and the Yellowstone caldera in America, as well as the Nemrut caldera in Turkey.
Here, it is again.
Well then, but I want to say something else later when we get back here that I want to mention as being very important. Which is why I want to talk then about all the wrong things that were done in ancient times in religious degenerate fanaticism, precisely by religious fanatics who formed murderous groups, went around the countries, and murdered masses of people.
Yes, but now we should.
Now that we are back, I think it is appropriate that you speak of what you were going to say before we left.
Yes, I think it is necessary to say a few more things regarding the fanatical degenerations that have occurred with regard to the Christian religion. At various times it happened again and again that religious maniacs organized groups, preached the end of the world, or had alleged apparitions of Mother Mary and so on. One group beat their backs bloody with spiked leather straps, while others murdered priests, others harassed populations and destroyed their possessions, etc., etc. People were massacred, just as others were burnt alive, en masse, because they were of a different faith, etc. However, all this, what really happened, and how it happened, is kept secret from the Christian faithful to this day, and the witch hunts are only mentioned once at most, and not explained sufficiently. This is despite the fact that it would be necessary to carry out a good educational program that is permanent, and will be taught for a long time to come, in order to show how Christianity was built up through murder, fanaticism, and coercion, and is still occasionally enforced today through murder and manslaughter. Accurate records of what happened centuries ago should be taught for a very long time in the future, and reminded to people again and again. And not only with regard to the gruesome events of the murders of alleged witches who are said to have courted the devil, or ridden around on broomsticks in the air. The truth is that such evil delusions, murderousness, torture, evil deeds and persecution etc. of Christianity were also commonplace in a similar way, with regard to many other religions and sects, whose history of development was no better, and just as gruesome and bloody, and contemptuous of human life. But what I want to say in this regard, is that from now on, under no circumstances should anyone be physically attacked, injured or even killed as a result of their views and beliefs, either verbally or in the form of assault. No matter how and what a person thinks and believes, if it is right, and therefore does not violate safety, life, or the inviolability of the body, does not harm a person's property, and does not discriminate against them, it is and always will be their human right and dignity to organize, cherish, and cultivate their thoughts and beliefs as they please, or believe to be right. Therefore, he must be absolutely free in person in this respect, must not be approached personally, with regard to his thoughts, feelings, emotions and beliefs, but must be absolutely free. However, this does not mean that a more open word should not be spoken or written about reality and its truth in a general way, although, as explained, no person may be personally attacked in any way. The clear general statement of truth must, however, be preserved and defended, but any personal attack is not right, so that every person must be free and unmolested in his thoughts and beliefs. It is therefore never right to personally attack, harass or even address a person in this respect, because everyone has the right to be absolutely free in their thoughts and beliefs, if they are right and not in any way evil, bad or harmful to their fellow human beings, or the environment as a whole. This also means that no groups or organizations etc., as well as no laws and regulations etc., of any kind whatsoever, should be created that are directed against people's thoughts and beliefs, against a race or social status. Every people and every human being must be absolutely free and unmolested with regard to their thoughts and beliefs, as well as their religion, race and social status, so that they are in no way harassed, hated, insulted, tortured, even murdered, or in any way impaired with regard to their possessions and property. All this must not be and should be in accordance with human order, rightness, and the absolute freedom of man. However, just as this is absolutely right, it is also absolutely right that reality and its truth may be communicated verbally and in writing in a general manner, but without addressing a person personally or even attacking them, just as I do with regard to reality and its truth with regard to religions and religious belief, but in a general, enlightening manner, without ever addressing a person personally or even addressing them in a directly personal manner. And it must be absolutely permissible to openly name reality and its truth, because only in this way is it possible for people to pick up on this and reflect on it, in order to possibly be able to comprehend and understand the actual truth, and then, of their own free will, to organize their lives accordingly.
What you said, you could have said earlier, because your words are exactly what should be understood by Earth people.
I feel the same way about that.
Good, then that is clear. But now it is necessary that after that, we should end everything for today with regard to our conversations, because tomorrow at 8 o'clock we have to meet again for a longer period of time.
Then so be it, and I will be ready at 8 o'clock. Bye together.
See you tomorrow then.
Goodbye, Eduard, my friend.
So be it. Goodbye.
I second that. Goodbye tomorrow.
Sunday, the 7th of December 2025, 13:51 hours.
Then everything is finished now, and everything is back to normal. I will also go back to my assigned duties and come back here as usual.
Sure, it will be the same with Enjana, Quetzal, and Bermunda, who have already left to replace your substitutes, as they said. Are they going back to Era today? But for now I should phone Eva and tell her I am back. Wait, please.
That was right, so now she knows. And I will be back soon, that is for sure. Then I will go back now too. Goodbye, dear friend.
See you again soon, Florena. Goodbye, Florena.